good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Museum of the United States Army. This is our monthly evening book talk, and we're glad to have you with us. Thanks for being here with us, to our audience members. Tonight, we're joined by Robert Child, and as you can see, the book is Immortal Valor. And this book is very recent, so we're glad to have him. He is a military history writer and director. He co-authored a book, The Lost 11, that came out from Penguin and Random House. He has published 9 other nonfiction military history titles. He's garnered more than 26 writing and directing awards, including an Emmy nomination, and hosts the weekly military history podcast, Point of the Spear. So welcome, Mr. Child, again. Glad to have you with us.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, John. Thank you.
Good. Well, before we start talking about Immortal Valor, let me ask you a couple of questions. Tell us about the Emmy. What was that for?
The Emmy was for the film with National Geographic called The Worth 11 back in 2011, a World War II story that actually became the book, The Lost 11. And that story is about 11 black soldiers during the Battle of the Bulge, whose artillery unit, the 333rd, was overrun on the first 2 days of the Battle of the Bulge, and they escaped to a town north of them, about 10 kilometers, called Wereth, and they were tracked down by the SS and massacred in a war crime that was swept under the rug, unfortunately, at the time, but it is well known now. And that's what that book was about.
Oh, thank you. So congratulations on the Emmy nomination. That's awesome. And your podcast has been going on for quite some time, and a blog as well. So yes, folks can find you in various outlets on the web and in print. So that's great. So let's switch over a little bit here to Immortal Valor. And can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to this story? And maybe it has something to do with the book you just previously mentioned in the documentary. But how did you get attracted to this story?
Yeah, you're correct. The Worth 11 and the Lost 11 led into this book, Immortal Valor, because after I finished the film and the book, I felt, and I've said to many people, that I felt there was a treasure trove of stories about black soldiers in World War II that were just waiting to be told. And I wanted to continue in that vein. So I was thinking about it, and I said, what would be the best story to tell that would interest a lot of people? And I thought that the 7 Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II would be the perfect choice. And it wasn't an easy book to write because there was not that much information. It was the most difficult research on any book I've ever done, because there simply wasn't the information out there, because they didn't leave much correspondence. So I had to go tracing back through genealogy sites like Ancestry.com and other sites, Classmate.com, to look for their connections, to kind of build their stories. So it was a real challenge, but a fun challenge too.
Good. So speaking of challenges, our question to audience members tonight is about the book. And if you are the first person to answer the question, you will win a free autographed copy of the book. Which man highlighted in the book, in this story, was still alive to receive the Medal of Honor in person at the White House ceremony? So this is one of 7 African Americans awarded the Medal of Honor in World War II. So hopefully folks will get that. And it looks like we might have somebody who was able to get that, and it turns out we did. So our winner here is Jim McNaughton, who is a retired Army historian. So we're glad for Jim. But yes, that is correct. So Jim, we will make sure you get in touch with Robert about the prize. So either either Jim has read the book or our question's too easy. So next time we'll have to have a more rigorous question. So
That's my fault.
that's all right. So so what the story is really about, and this is not giving away their individual stories, but what you go over in the book is the fact that the awards, the medals that out of 1 million African Americans who served in World War II, and that's across all branches, correct? Navy,
Yes.
Marines, Army. Okay.
Yes.
Um, Not one single African American soldier received the Medal of Honor, and then there was 432 American servicemen won it, and none were African American. And you not only go through the stories, which will when I turn it over to you, we'll go through those stories. But what you found was that a lot of the reason why they were denied the Medal of Honor was discrimination, and it took years. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. In my research and discovery process, I discovered that, and also the Shaw University study that was commissioned to study why no black service members received the Medal of Honor, also discovered this fact that there was an unspoken rule within the armed forces that no black soldier would be recommended for the Medal of Honor, no matter what, basically. And that wasn't known to the black soldiers, but well known to the white commanders. And many white commanders who wanted to recommend their deserving black soldiers for the Medal of Honor were hamstrung. So they ended up recommending them for the second highest honor, the Distinguished Service Cross. But that's the main reason why they weren't recommended for the Medal of Honor. And there was only one of the 7 who was not awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. And that's because his commander refused, actually, to submit him for the lesser award, and that's Ruben Rivers. He had received a Silver Star within the first month of his service, and I can talk about Ruben later when we talk about the men, but his commander wouldn't give up. He demanded that Ruben receive the Medal of Honor, and he fought for 50 years to see that done, and he actually was in attendance at the ceremony in 1997 to
Wow.
see Ruben's sister awarded his medal.
Wow. Well, amazing story. So, okay, well, what I'll do now, we'll bring up the slides and turn it over to you to talk about these stories,
Sure.
and then we'll wrap it up when you've talked about the seven awardees here, and so looking forward to hearing it.
Yeah. Vernon Baker, as you know, was the recipient of the award in person at the White House ceremony, and congratulations to the winner who guessed that off the top. Vernon was from Cheyenne, Wyoming, and he joined the Army and trained at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and was part of the 92nd Division that went over to Italy, and he fought in Italy near the Gothic Line. And he was a dedicated warrior, very smart, and he wasn't happy with the way that he saw fellow black soldiers being treated in the 92nd, and he realized there were some major problems. But what he did to earn the medal was he took a platoon up against a German stronghold, a castle as a matter of fact. He advanced a platoon after nearly all the regiment was unable to take this position. And he and his men advanced farther than any other platoon had advanced. And he actually was able to hold his position for several hours until he retreated back out. And he took out Germans who came out to fight them, but he held his position, and his actions allowed the Allies to push through that position, which was a stubborn position, and the Germans ended up abandoning that position. So his actions were instrumental in breaking the Gothic line in Italy. And you can advance to the next slide. John Fox, I think people probably know about him. I closed the book with John Fox. And this photograph you see on the screen here is very special because it's not seen that often. This actually came from his daughter, who allowed us to use it in the book. It's only been in print in one other book. And John Fox was also in Italy. He was part of an artillery company, a cannon company, and he, over Christmas 1944, volunteered to serve as a forward observer in this Italian town in Tuscany called Somma Colonia. And he served in this town in a stone tower that was 47, I'm not sure if it was feet or height, or meters, I'm sorry, high over Christmas. And there was only about 75 of his unit in the town, and 25 of the Italian partisans. And they were attacked in a surprise attack, overwhelmed by several, they ended up being Austrian mountaineer units of the Germans who attacked the town, surrounded it, and overwhelmed his unit. And he began calling in artillery strikes as you saw the Germans advancing towards the town. And finally, when they were overwhelmed and his men were fighting hand-to-hand combat in the streets, he called an artillery strike in on his own position. And his commander at the fire control center questioned it and wouldn't do it, actually. So they decided to send the request up to General, I believe it was Truscott, and he okayed unleashing artillery barrage on John Fox's position in the town, because John Fox said there's more of them than there are of us, and we've got to take them out. So he ended up being taken out by the artillery barrage of his own men, and died in the fighting in Somma Colonia. And he was delayed in his receiving a Distinguished Service Cross until the 80s, and he received his Medal of Honor in 1997. And you can advance to the next slide. Charles Thomas was from Detroit, Michigan, and he trained in Battle Creek, and he was unique of the men because he was part of a new unit called the Tank Destroyer Battalion. He was and he trained as an officer for this battalion. It was a new unit, and when they formed the unit, he was part of the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion. When they formed the unit, I believe it was 42, they made a rule that if black soldiers joined this unit, they had to have the opportunity to become officers. So that's why he became an officer and a first lieutenant. And he commanded he was a company commander, Company C, and he commanded his company in France against a German position. Again, it was a town in France called Klambach, and his role in the tank destroyer battalion was to draw fire away from this town. The town was held by the 22nd Panzer Grenadiers, who were veterans of North Africa, and his role was to draw fire away from the town towards his position so the infantry could encircle and tanks could encircle and take the town so they could advance forward. But he said himself that he didn't expect to draw that much fire. He drew so much fire that his unit took 50% casualties, and he had, I believe it was either 9 or 11 wounds himself, and had to be carried away from the position, but he held it, and for several hours, and the Americans were able to take the town in the evening. And he was so wounded that his men thought that he was dead, that he had died when he was carried away, and he survived and went back to Michigan. And what's unique about his unit is it was the first black unit in World War II to receive the Presidential Unit Citation. So that was amazing, his actions. He ended up becoming an IRS agent in Detroit, and passed away, I think, in the 80s. So you can go to the next slide. George Watson was part of the 29th Quartermaster Battalion. He served in the South Pacific Theater. He was from Kansas City, I believe, or Mississippi. I'm not sure of that. I'd have to go look at the book. But he served on a ship. He was what they called a laundry specialist. He trained in Virginia and was part of the 29th Quartermaster Battalion. And his ship was attacked in the South Pacific near Papua New Guinea, and it caught fire, and the ship was sinking, and the men were ordered overboard, and they threw all their life rafts overboard, so everyone could try to preserve life. And he had been an excellent swimmer growing up, and he saw that some of the men couldn't swim, and as the ship was sinking down around them, he took it upon himself to go and save man after man after man and bring them to the life rafts that were scattered about the sinking ship. And over, I believe it was easily, 30, 40 minutes, he saved many men, including his direct superior. But on the last man that he tried to save, the ship went down and pulled him down with it, and he drowned, and his body was never found. And a tragic story, but he really showed what selfless courage was all about. You can go to the next slide. Edward Carter, who is on the front of the book here, is many people say to me that he seems like a Superman, and I would agree. He is quite the story. He was born in Los Angeles to missionary parents. His mother was from India, and she was Anglo-Indian, and they moved from Los Angeles as missionaries and stayed in Calcutta for a short time, and then ended up in Shanghai when he was really young, in the international settlement in Shanghai in the early 30s. And Shanghai in the early 30s, unlike the rest of the globe, was booming. It didn't experience the Great Depression, and until the Japanese decided to attack, because they were jealous of the wealth and prosperity of that area of China. And during the chaos of the Japanese attack, he was sort of under the thumb of his domineering father, and he saw the attack and the defense of the area as a way to see some adventure. So he actually escaped from the sanctuary where they were taking shelter and wandered over to the Chinese 19th Army. And he had been attending the Shanghai Military Academy, and he knew Chinese, Cantonese, I believe it was. And he talked the guards into letting him join the Chinese 19th Army and fight on the side of the Chinese. And they needed men, so they welcomed him in. And he fought so well against the Japanese Marines that were invading at the time that his commander was about ready to elevate him to a lieutenant. But his parents, his father, who was word sick about him, came and found him at the headquarters of the Chinese 19th Army and told his commander that he couldn't elevate him to to a lieutenant because he was underage, and he was going to bring him back home. So a little bit of embarrassment for Eddie, but he went back home and was still itching to get back into the fight. And when the Italians invaded Abyssinia, I'm not sure what year that was, he went to the American consulate in Shanghai and asked to fight. And they turned him down because they said that America wasn't at war with the Italians. So they gave him a consolation. They said, you can serve in the Merchant Marines. So he served in the Merchant Marines for 9 months and then returned to Los Angeles. And that was the first time that he saw in his life really discrimination, encountered discrimination in Los Angeles, and also the Great Depression. So there was no work for a black man in the mid to late 30s in Los Angeles. So he decided, he saw the pictures of the Spanish Civil War in Life magazine, and he decided to use his Merchant Marine contacts to get back into the fight. And he went over to Spain and joined the Abraham Lincoln Brigade and fought on the side of what ended up being the communists. But he wasn't a communist. He was just fighting for freedom against Franco. And he stayed, he was performed very well against the forces, but Franco's forces overwhelmed them, and he returned home, I believe, in 1940. Again, he was back in Los Angeles, and there was no work, and he decided that his life was really the military, so he decided to join in late 1941 the Army in the States, and he trained at Fort Benning and was part of a quartermaster battalion that went over to Europe, that got shipped over, and he kept petitioning to be put into combat because he had won marksmanship awards in the unit, in the quartermaster unit. He was the best shot they had, but he wrote letters home to his wife, Mildred, that, he didn't sign up to push a mop, and he was the best shot they had. So finally, in late December 1944, in the aftermath of the Battle of the Bulge, Eisenhower and his commanders realized that they needed men in rifle companies because of the attrition, because of the German attack and the battle, and they were losing too many white soldiers from the rifle companies. So they issued a letter inviting black soldiers in any unit to the privilege of serving in combat. And this is when he got his opportunity, and he was accepted into the training program in northern France and trained. And again, he really was the best soldier And he became part of, in 1945, February 1945, became part of the 12th Armored Division, infantry unit within the 12th Armored. And he was part of Patton's Mystery Division that entered, and they called the Mystery Division because they were ordered to remove all patches off their uniforms as they entered Germany, so if they were discovered, the Germans wouldn't know what unit they were with. But it was the 12th Armored. And he was on patrol entering unscouted territory with his patrol, with a convoy. And the convoy was attacked from the road from a abandoned warehouse by an 88 and also a machine gun nest. And they were pinned down, and he told his commander, Vanderhoff, that he could take the position. So they said, well, if you, you can give it a try. So he got several other men, and they made a plan, and they started crossing a road. It was 150 meters towards the position. They were under fire, and as they started entering the field, 2 of the men were wounded and ended up being killed, but he kept pressing forward. And he got the farthest of any of the men, but he was shot up so much that he was bending down on the ground, and the canteen he was holding actually got shot out of his hand because a bullet went through his hand. And he sustained about 9 bullet wounds. And he was carrying a Thompson submachine gun. And he knew the Germans would come out looking for him because they had seen him, get close. And he had made a plan to, when they came out, he had rehearsed it in his mind that he would take them out, all of them with his Thompson submachine gun. And he could barely stand, but what he did was he waited till hear a German come close and call that he had seen an American, which the German did. And at that moment, he put all his weight on his Thompson submachine gun, pulled himself up, and shot 6 of the 8 of the Germans who were in this patrol to find him. The 2 other Germans who remained were in shock and put up their hands, and he took them prisoner. And mind you, he could barely walk. So what he did was he put one in front of him and one in back of him, and he backed all the way back to the convoy with these 2 Germans basically covering him. And it was a moment, as I write in war, where both sides just stood in awe and watched this man cross back to the American lines with these 2 German prisoners. And it doesn't end there, because the twist in the story is his commander, Vanderhoff, saw how shot up he was and said, Carter, we got to get you, medical attention, because he was bleeding all over the place and could barely walk. And Carter said, no, we have to interrogate these men. And they were all, none of them spoke German, so they were all blank. And Carter, who had learned German in Shanghai, started interrogating the Germans in German. And he discovered he was interrogating them about the Germans' positions ahead, hidden positions. And the Germans revealed the hidden positions to Carter and his convoy and his commander. And they were able to, as a result of that, they were able to advance the convoy safely farther into German territory. And Carter, of course, was sent back to the hospital. And one more thing about Carter, and I know I'm taking a long time with Carter, is he spent time in the hospital, and he wrote home to his wife Mildred that he was shot 9 times, but he was still kicking, and he wanted to get back to the fight. So that was his spirit. and he found out that a captain was returning to the 10th Armored, which was near his men, his old unit. So he hitched a ride. He basically escaped from the hospital, hitched a ride with his command officer from the 10th Armored, and they dropped him off near his position, his old unit. And he came walking back into his unit to the shock of his commander. And at the same time, the hospital had contacted them, Carter's unit, and reported that Carter had escaped the hospital and gone AWOL. And Vanderhoff said, "No, he didn't. He's right in front of me. Not to worry. He's back where he belongs." So that's Edward Carter in a nutshell. So you can advance to the next slide. This is Willie James Jr. He is he's from Kansas City. He's from Kansas City, I believe. Kansas City, Kansas. And he became a scout. And as a scout, he led, he was one of the best shots in the unit. And he led his team. There was a river crossing, and they were exploring a town, and he was sent ahead to explore this town. And it was very dangerous because it was a town that was filled with the SS soldiers. And he scouted the town and came back to his commander and reported the German positions. And then his commander asked him to help lead the patrol into the town, which he did. And as they were leading the patrol, he was side by side with his commander. His commander was shot. His name was Cerebella, and he was shot, and he fell in the street, middle of the street, and Willie ran to his aid and started trying to pull him to safety, and he himself was shot down alongside his commander. And died in the advance. And there's not much known about him, but I was able to, through Sergeant Carter's daughter-in-law, get pictures of his family, which was amazing to see. And you can advance to the next slide. Ruben Rivers, who I spoke about earlier, he was the one whose commander, Captain David Williams, wouldn't give up on him as far as receiving the Medal of Honor. Reuben was commanded at a section of tanks. He was part of the 761st Tank Battalion that trained at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, part of what they called Patton's Black Panthers. And going back a little bit, they had trained in Camp Claiborne for a long time. Actually, they were overtrained, and they never thought that they would get a chance to get into the war until Patton came back and told the War Department that he needed tankers, and they told him that the only tankers left were the black tankers, and Patton famously said, "I didn't ask what color they were, I just said I needed tankers." And that's why the 761st was nicknamed Patton's Black Panthers, because he specifically asked them to help him join the fight, and he ended up addressing them in France, and in a very famous speech. And they're very proud in the letters that I read to fight for Patton. And Reuben and his unit, commanded Company A by David Williams, was entering German territory, and he commanded a tank section of 2 tanks, and he always seemed to be moving ahead. In fact, he received the Silver Star in a situation where his company was following a section of infantry into battle, and they got bogged down because there was a tree trunk across the road filled with mines, and it stopped the convoy dead in their tracks, and the infantry was pinned down. So Reuben took it upon himself he was at the back of the line, to go ahead of his commander in the lead tank and go stop by the tree trunk. He attached a steel cable of his Sherman tank to the tree trunk under fire. They were under mortar fire and small arms fire. And he attached the steel cable to the tree trunk and pulled it off the road as exploding mines went off, and he jumped back in the tank, obviously. And David Williams had asked them when Reuben went by him to the front, where the heck you going? And he said, I got to get this out of the way. So upon his own initiative, he pulled the mined tree trunk off the road so the tanks could advance and protect the infantry. And for that action, he received the Silver Star. And then he became the lead tank from then on. And he took out a Tiger tank at point blank range and a couple other things. So he was Williams' main tanker. And they end up entering a town where there were hidden German anti-tank guns, 75 millimeter tank guns, anti-tank guns. And they were unaware of it. And Reuben's tank was in the lead, and he saw the guns, and he shouted into his radio to his commander that he said, I see him, I'm going to take him out, I'm going to fight him. So he advanced out against the guns, and the Germans fired 2 shells. One split his tank in half, and another one followed it and exploded. And he was instantly killed and lost his life there. He had been wounded previously earlier on reconnaissance after he had removed the mine. So he was operating with a leg that was badly wounded. So he wasn't at full strength, but that's the story of Ruben Rivers. And you can advance to the next slide. And this is the presentation of the Medal of Honor in 1997. From left to right, President Clinton. I'm sorry, from right to left. President Clinton, that's Vernon Baker, beside him, who received the Medal of Honor in person. The woman is Susan Thomas, Charles Thomas's niece. The woman next to her is Arlene Fox, the wife of John Fox. The man next to her is the son of Sergeant Carter. His name is Edward Carter III. And the woman next to him is Grace Rivers, the sister of Ruben Rivers. And not in the picture is the Master Sergeant of the Army who accepted the Medal of Honor for George Watson. We can take some questions.
Okay, good. We do have some questions. The first one, which I think is really an interesting one, is, and by the way, thank you for going through those stories. And for those of you who haven't read the book, and I did read the book, I want to compliment you, Robert, and also alert the audience that these individual stories are written in a very free-flowing, kind of fast-paced way that's lucid and also very entertaining. So I highly recommend the book. And hopefully this is just, the details we got tonight is just scratching the surface of these men and also their families and what they did. But the interesting question that we got first is when did it become known publicly that blacks were not going to be given the Medal of Honor? And I'm assuming that was after the war. So when did it become known as a public as a fact or through the press or something? When did that become known?
Yeah, the way it happened was actually there was up until the late '80s there were no black soldiers from World War One who were awarded the Medal of Honor either, and a researcher, I believe his name was Harnden Hargrove, and an author, pursued the case of one of the World War One soldiers, who I believe it was Freddie Stowers, and I may be wrong on that. But he pursued awarding of the Medal of Honor for Freddie Stowers, who was a World War One soldier, and he was successful in bringing attention to the Army's attention that this soldier deserved the medal, and that became the catalyst for the Defense Department to look into, to ask the question, why no soldiers from World War II, black soldiers, had received the Medal of Honor either. So it was really the first awarding of Medal of Honor to a black soldier in World War I that got the ball rolling. And what the Defense Department did was they decided to put out a bid to conduct a study as to why no black soldiers from World War II were awarded the Medal of Honor. And that study was done at Shaw University in the early 90s. And extensive, exhaustive survey, and there's a book written about it that you can find online. Amazing study, and they were thorough, and they did their due diligence, and they uncovered 9 or 10 black soldiers' names to be recommended to the military to award the Medal of Honor. That's how it started.
Okay, a similar question one of our audience members asked is, was this unwritten rule about African American soldiers being denied the Medal of Honor, did that apply to other people of color besides African Americans?
That's a good question, because at the time they were called the colored units, and I found out that did not mean only black soldiers. That meant colored units were people of Latin descent. So that's a good question. I don't have an answer for it.
Okay, so how I believe from the later chapters of the book, you were able to meet or at least talk to some of the family members as
Yes,
part of your research. What was that like?
it was amazing, amazing. I was able to talk to Susan Fox, a daughter of John Fox. I was able to talk to the niece of Charles Thomas, and I was able to meet and become actually good friends with Elaine Carter, who was Sergeant Carter's daughter-in-law. And Elaine Carter is, I like to call her a force of nature because she doesn't take no for an answer. And she's quite an individual. And she was able to kind of rally the families for me and have them give me all I needed, permissions, things like that, to use the photographs. And she supplied most of the photographs in the book, which have never been in print. So the situation is really has really been incredible working with the families, and we're doing in November we're doing a special event on November 10th for Veterans Day at the World War II Museum in New Orleans, where Sergeant Carter is one of the highlights of the presentation. So we're looking forward to that.
Great. So, another question we have is, after these men were awarded Distinguished Service Cross and Silver Star, things like that, what was the process of upgrading to Medal of Honor?
I looked into that a little bit. I believe they had to issue a letter saying that the Distinguished Service Cross has been replaced with the Medal of Honor. They received letters to that effect, where it was no longer to be worn. I mean, the Medal of Honor was to be worn. But I didn't really look into that extensively. I just saw one of the letters that one of the men received after the, I think it was a letter to Vernon Baker, after he received the Medal of Honor.
And when it became known, going back to the question of this kind of revelation that African Americans were not getting awarded anything, or not getting awarded Medal of Honor, was there an outcry among the African American veteran community, or was it more like, well, we could have told you so?
It was more, unfortunately, in that vein. But what's interesting is there was also a sense of what I discovered was pride. They felt like they had done their jobs, and that's all they needed to know. They felt like they had done their job, especially Vernon Baker. He was a little embarrassed that they contacted him about the Medal of Honor, because he didn't feel like he needed it, and he had a difficult time actually moving forward with the process, because he felt like they had done their jobs and it was time to move on. So there was that as well.
So some of our audience may be interested in knowing that the museum's parent organization, the Army Center of Military History at Fort McNair in D.C., not frequently, but occasionally gets research requests for Medal of Honor upgrades, and often it's Vietnam veterans. But one of the interesting things is that some of them over the last 10 or 12 years have even included the Civil War. Alonzo
Really?
Cushing Medal of Honor was awarded, I want to say, about 10 or 12 years ago, and that was for Gettysburg. So they still look at these things. And for our audience members who are here with us tonight, and we'll see this in recording, many of you probably tuned in to the book talk we had about 4 or 5 months ago with Tom Gugliano, whose book Divisions was more of an academic look at the Army. It's only the Army and African Americans and discrimination and racism in the Army in World War II. So if you were interested in that, your book, Robert, really kind of puts the stories to the overall framework, which is good. So we appreciate that. So tell us a little bit about your next project.
Well, I'm in the midst of, we talked about this offline a little bit. I've been involved with launching a project about regarding the Navy and naval combat search and rescue in Vietnam with a unit called HC-7, which were it was a helicopter unit, only naval unit dedicated to combat search and rescue in naval history. And I've been working with the veterans on that to bring a documentary out next year. And one of their pilots actually received the Medal of Honor, one of two Naval Medal of Honors naval medals awarded during the Vietnam War, and that was Clyde Lassen. So it's a very proud unit, and we're in the midst of funding and production for that film. It's called No Warrior Left Behind, The Untold Story of HC-7. And I also have a book pitching with my agent that I mentioned on Alexander Hamilton and his wartime service, which many people don't know about. It's a book focused only on his war service, and not many people know that Alexander Hamilton is a war hero, and he led the attack at Fortress Yorktown at the end of the Revolutionary War. So I have that project in as well, and I'm always busy with other military things and the weekly podcast as well.
Well, Robert Child, author of Immortal Valor, thank you for joining us tonight. We really enjoyed that. And again, as I mentioned, just the tip of the iceberg on the stories, and I encourage everyone to read it. So again, Robert, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time, and good luck on all your future endeavors.
I appreciate it, John. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. We're glad to do it. And thanks to Caitlin for producing. Thanks to our audience for joining us. And with that, we'll say goodnight and see you next time.